The scent of saffron and sea salt clung to my uniform like a second skin. My feet ached inside the black flats I'd worn for the past 9 hours. The leather cracked along the sides where my toes pressed against the seams. I balanced the tray of empty espresso cups against my hip, navigating between tables draped in cream linen at Ristorante Bella Vista, where the chandeliers cast amber light over faces that never looked at servers like me. The clatter of silverware against porcelain provided a constant rhythm, punctuated by the low murmur of conversations in Italian, French, and the occasional English of tourists who thought they understood Palermo. My name is Rosalia, 24 years old, and I'd been working at Bella Vista for 3 years, ever since my grandmother passed and left me with nothing but her gold cross necklace and an apartment in Ballarò that smelled of mildew no matter how many windows I opened. The restaurant sat on Via Ruggiero Settimo, where old money and new power intersected over plates of pasta con lissard and bottles of Nero d'Avola that cost more than I made in a week. Not that I could afford to think about comparisons like that. I just served the food, collected the tips when they came, and tried not to meet anyone's eyes too directly. Tonight felt different. The air held a tension I couldn't name, like the heavy stillness before a summer storm rolls in from the Tyrrhenian. Signor Vittorio, the floor manager, had been pacing near the kitchen entrance since 8 o'clock, his movements sharp and anxious. He kept glancing toward the private dining room at the back, the one with the curtained entrance that we only prepared for special guests. VIP guests. The kind who arrived in black Mercedes with tinted windows and left generous cash tips that we never reported. Rosalia, Vittorio's voice cut through my thoughts as I set the tray down at the service station. Table 12 needs attention. The Nebbiolo, 2015. And don't linger. I nodded, smoothing my black apron over my simple white blouse. Table 12 sat in the corner, partially hidden by a marble column and a potted lemon tree that perfumed that section of the dining room. As I approached with the wine, I could see him clearly for the first time tonight. Salvatore Santoro. I knew the name before I knew the face, the way everyone in Palermo knew certain names without needing introduction. He sat with his back to the wall, as men like him always did, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the precision of tailored perfection. His dark hair was swept back from a face carved from Sicilian stone, all sharp angles and unreadable expressions. A gold ring gleamed on his right hand as he gestured while speaking to the 2 men seated across from him. They leaned in, listening with the deference of subordinates. I'd served him before, twice in the past year. He never looked at me directly, never spoke to me beyond necessary courtesies, and tipped exactly 20%. Nothing more, nothing less. Predictable, professional. Dangerous in ways I didn't let myself think about too carefully. Signor Santoro. I kept my voice low, respectful, as I showed him the label on the bottle. He glanced up, his dark eyes passing over me without recognition, and nodded once. I poured with steady hands despite the flutter in my chest, the wine breathing into crystal glasses that caught the light. As I turned to leave, I heard it. The phone on the table, slightly louder than it should have been. One of his men had answered it and was speaking in rapid Italian, his voice tight with urgency. I shouldn't have listened. Every instinct told me to walk away, to return to the service station and forget whatever I was hearing. But I heard the name, Ginevra. And then I heard, La polizia, hanno la posizione, 10 minuti, forse meno. The police, they have the location. 10 minutes, maybe less. I froze behind the marble column, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Ginevra Lombardi. Everyone knew that name too. Salvatore's ex-fiancée, the woman whose family had tried to forge an alliance through marriage 2 years ago. The engagement that ended abruptly, whispered about in cafes and market stalls, never explained but always speculated upon. The man on the phone continued, his words tumbling over each other. È lei. Ginevra ha dato l'informazione ai federali. Stanno arrivando. It's her. Ginevra gave the information to the feds. They're coming. My hands trembled as I gripped the empty wine bottle. I should leave. I should pretend I heard nothing, collect my tips at the end of the night, and go home to my cramped apartment, where the biggest danger was the mold on the bathroom ceiling. But something in me, some reckless impulse born from 3 years of watching powerful men treat servers like furniture, made me move. I walked quickly to the service station, grabbed a pen and one of the small notepads we used for orders, and wrote in my neatest handwriting, "Your ex-fiancé sold you out. Back exit through the kitchen. Alley to Via Barra. Come now." My grandmother used to tell me that the women in our family had instincts that saved lives. She said it came from generations of surviving wars, famines, and men who thought they owned everything. I didn't know if I believed in inherited instincts, but I believed in the cold dread spreading through my stomach as I folded the note. I retrieved another bottle of Nebbiolo from the wine cellar, this one already opened for a different table, and approached table 12 again. My heart threatened to bruise my ribs from the inside. "Scusi, Signor Santoro." I kept my voice steady, professional, as I leaned in to pour a splash into his glass, refreshing what was already there. As I did, I placed the folded note directly beside his right hand, where only he could see it. "Complimenti dello chef," I murmured. Compliments of the chef. His eyes met mine for the first time. Truly met them. And I saw the flicker of surprise before his expression hardened into something unreadable. He didn't open the note immediately. Instead, he continued his conversation as if nothing had happened, his fingers casually brushing the paper, claiming it. I walked away on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I returned to the service station, busied myself with cleaning wine glasses, and tried not to watch as Salvatore opened the note under the table, his face betraying nothing as he read. 10 seconds later, he stood. His men immediately rose with him, confusion flickering across their features. He said something low and sharp, and they nodded, their hands moving to their jackets in a way that made my mouth go dry. Salvatore's eyes found me across the room, held my gaze for 1 heartbeat, 2, and then he moved. Not toward the main entrance. Toward the hallway that led to the restrooms and beyond that, the kitchen. Vittorio intercepted him, all nervous smiles and bobbing head. "Signor Santoro, is everything satisfactory? Can we... il conto?" The bill. Salvatore's voice was smooth, commanding. "And my compliments to your staff, particularly the young woman who served our table." He handed Vittorio a fold of euro notes without counting them, far more than the meal cost, and continued walking. His men flanked him as they disappeared down the hallway. I heard the kitchen staff's startled voices, the bang of the back door, and then silence. 30 seconds later, the restaurant's main entrance burst open. 4 men in dark suits, moving with the coordinated precision of law enforcement, scanning the room with sharp eyes. They headed straight for table 12, now empty except for half-drunk wine and a still warm espresso cup. One of them, the eldest with silver threading his dark hair, approached Vittorio. "Where is Salvatore Santoro?" Vittorio's face drained of color. He left. Just now. The main entrance." His eyes darted to the hallway, but he didn't correct himself. Lying to federal agents. The kind of lie that could cost him everything. The agents swept through anyway, checking the restrooms, bursting into the kitchen where our chef shouted protests in colorful Sicilian dialect. But the back door stood closed, innocuous, and they didn't think to check the alley immediately. By the time they did, Salvatore Santoro and his men would be blocks away, dissolved into the Palermo night. The restaurant descended into chaos. Agents questioned staff. Vittorio wrung his hands. Other diners whispered and stared. I continued cleaning wine glasses, my hands steady despite the adrenaline singing through my veins, my face carefully blank. One of the agents approached me. "Did you see which direction Signor Santoro went?" I met his eyes, channeling every ounce of my grandmother's stubbornness. "I saw him walk toward the restrooms, signore. I was busy with other tables. I didn't see him leave." The lie fell from my lips as smooth as good olive oil. The agent studied me for a long moment, clearly unconvinced. But I was nobody. A waitress. Invisible. He moved on to question the sommelier. The restaurant closed early that night. Vittorio sent us home with apologetic shrugs and promises that it wouldn't affect our pay. I walked home through streets that smelled of jasmine and exhaust, my shoes rubbing blisters into my heels, the gold cross necklace warm against my skin. I'd saved a mafia boss tonight, warned him of a trap set by his ex-fiancée, helped him escape federal agents. The weight of what I'd done settled over me like the humid Sicilian air, heavy and inescapable. My apartment greeted me with its familiar mustiness, the single window overlooking a narrow street where laundry hung between buildings like tired flags. I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and sank onto my second-hand sofa, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. I didn't know what would happen now, if anything would happen. Maybe Salvatore Santoro would forget the face of the waitress who'd passed him a note. Maybe the agents would decide I wasn't worth investigating. Maybe I'd wake up tomorrow and return to Bella Vista, and this would become just another story Palermo swallowed without comment. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. The women in our family had instincts that saved lives. I'd saved his tonight. I didn't yet know what that would cost me. 3 days passed in careful routine. I returned to Bella Vista, served tables, collected tips, and avoided meeting anyone's eyes too directly. The federal agents didn't return. Vittorio never mentioned that night, except to remind us all that discretion was part of our job, his voice tight with a warning we all understood. The restaurant resumed its rhythm of wealthy diners and expensive wines, the incident fading into the background like so many things did in Palermo. But I felt watched. Not constantly, not obviously, but in small moments. A black car idling too long across the street when I left for work. A man in a cafe who looked away too quickly when I glanced up. The sensation of eyes on my back as I walked home through narrow streets. My grandmother used to say that prey animals could sense predators before they struck. I'd always thought it was superstition. Now I wasn't sure. On the 4th day, everything changed. I'd just finished an evening shift, my feet aching in those same cracked flats, my uniform smelling of garlic and wine. The September air had cooled, carrying the scent of rain from the sea. I walked my usual route home, past the Baroque church of San Domenico, through the winding streets of Ballarò, where vendors were closing their market stalls, and the buildings leaned together like gossiping old women. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, fumbling for my keys in the dim hallway, lit by a single bare bulb. The door to my apartment stood slightly ajar. Just a centimeter, barely noticeable, but I never left it unlocked. Never. Fear flooded my mouth with the taste of copper. I should run. I should find a neighbor, call the police. Though in this neighborhood, that option felt almost as dangerous as whatever waited inside. Instead, I pushed the door open slowly, my hand gripping my keys between my fingers like the makeshift weapon they were. The lamp beside my sofa was on, illuminating a figure seated in my only armchair, the one I'd found on the street, and reupholstered myself with fabric from the market. Salvatore Santoro sat with the casual confidence of a man who belonged everywhere, his dark suit immaculate, his hands folded calmly in his lap. 2 men stood behind him, silent sentinels blocking my exit. Rosalia Catalano. He said my full name like he was tasting it, testing its weight. Please close the door. We need to talk. My hand trembled as I pushed the door shut, the click of the latch unnaturally loud. How did you know my name? A slight smile touched his lips, not quite reaching his eyes. I know everything about you now. Born here in Palermo, raised by your grandmother after your parents died in a car accident when you were 8. She was a seamstress, taught you to sew and embroider. She died 3 years ago, left you this apartment and €63 in savings. You've worked at Bella Vista since then. Never late, never complained. Send money to your cousin in Catania every month, even though you can barely afford it. Each fact felt like a violation, his knowledge stripping away the privacy I'd clung to. Why are you here? He stood, moving with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in his own power. Up close, I could see the faint scar along his jawline, the silver threads just beginning at his temples. The way his dark eyes assessed me with an intensity that made me feel transparent. You saved my life 4 nights ago. That's not something I take lightly. I just passed you a note. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Anyone would have... No. He cut me off, the single word sharp. Anyone would have looked away, would have protected themselves. You risked everything to warn a stranger about a trap you had no obligation to know about or care about. He paused, studying my face. Why? The question caught me off guard. Why had I done it? I thought of Ginevra, a woman I'd never met but whose name I knew from gossip and whispers, a woman who'd betrayed the man she'd once agreed to marry. Because it was wrong, I said finally. What she did. Selling you out to the police. Whatever you've done, whatever you are, that kind of betrayal. I trailed off, unable to articulate the instinct that had driven me. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of something almost like respect. My ex-fiancée is the daughter of Cosimo Lombardi, a man who controls most of the construction contracts in western Sicily. Our engagement was arranged to unite 2 families, 2 business interests. But Ginevra had other plans. She wanted power without partnership, wanted to eliminate me and claim what my family built. He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. The information she gave the feds would have put me in prison for 20 years, or gotten me killed in the confusion of the arrest. Either outcome would have served her purposes. His voice remained calm, conversational, but I heard the steel underneath. Instead, I walked out the back door of Bella Vista because a waitress I'd never really looked at decided to write a note. What happened to her? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. Ginevra? She's alive, if that's what concerns you. But her father has withdrawn his support after learning of her betrayal. In our world, that's a death sentence of a different kind. She'll spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when someone will come to collect on the debt she created. The casual cruelty of it made my stomach turn, but I kept my face neutral. You still haven't told me why you're here, in my apartment, at night. Salvatore reached into his jacket, and I flinched before I could stop myself. He noticed, that small smile returning. Tranquilla. Calm. He withdrew a thick envelope and set it on my small table, the one where I ate meals alone and paid bills I could barely afford. 50,000 euros. A thank you for your quick thinking. I stared at the envelope, my mind struggling to process the amount. 50,000 euros. More money than I'd see in years of serving wine to people who didn't look at me. Enough to fix the mold in my bathroom, buy new shoes, send my cousin real help. Enough to change everything. I can't accept that. The words came out automatically, my grandmother's voice echoing in my head. Never take money that comes with strings attached. You can, and you will. His tone left no room for argument. But there's more. He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward and handed him a folder. Salvatore opened it, showing me documents, photographs, official-looking papers with seals and signatures. The feds didn't give up. They're still investigating, still looking for evidence, and they've identified you as a person of interest. My blood went cold. What? One of the agents reviewed security footage from the restaurant. He saw you approach my table twice in 5 minutes with wine bottles. He saw me leave seconds after you served me the second time. He's not stupid, Rosalia. He's building a case that you were complicit, that you warned me. The room tilted. I reached for the back of the sofa to steady myself. But I didn't. I did. But I'm not involved in whatever you... I know that. You know that. But Agent Ricci doesn't care about the truth. He cares about closing his case, making arrests, advancing his career. Salvatore closed the folder, his expression serious. You're vulnerable now. Living alone, no family to protect you, working a job where you're visible and exposed. They'll pressure you to testify against me, to confirm what they suspect. And if you refuse, they'll make your life very difficult. If you cooperate, I have enemies who will make your life very short. Terror clawed up my throat. So what am I supposed to do? He stepped closer, near enough that I could smell the cedar and bergamot of his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. You accept my protection. You leave Bella Vista tonight. Leave this apartment. You come work for me. Work for you? I repeated, my voice hollow. Doing what? My assistant. My businesses require extensive coordination. Shipments, meetings, communications. I need someone organized, discreet, and loyal. Someone who's already proven they can think quickly under pressure. His gaze held mine. I can keep you safe, Rosalia. The feds won't touch you if you're under my protection. My enemies won't either. But you need to disappear from your old life, at least for a while. It wasn't an offer. It was a command dressed in the language of choice. I looked around my cramped apartment, at the life I'd built from nothing after my grandmother died. Small, yes. Humble, certainly. But mine. Leaving meant giving up the last threads of independence I had, meant stepping fully into a world I'd only glimpsed from the edges. And if I say no, I had to ask, even though I already knew the answer. Salvatore's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then I leave you to face the consequences of your kindness alone. The feds will come tomorrow, maybe the day after. They'll make you an offer you can't refuse, or they'll charge you with obstruction. Either way, your quiet life ends, and you'll have no protection from the people who want to hurt me by hurting anyone connected to me. The trap closed around me with the soft finality of a silk noose. I'd saved his life, and now that single act of instinct had bound us together in ways I couldn't escape. I thought of my grandmother's gold cross around my neck, wondered what she would tell me to do. But I already knew. She'd survived wars and famines by making impossible choices, by choosing the protection of dangerous men over the uncertainty of facing threats alone. What about my cousin? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. In Catania, will she be safe? I'll make sure of it. No one will touch your family. You have my word. I didn't know what his word was worth, but I knew what the alternative looked like. Federal prison, or a body in the harbor. Those were my options if I refused. When do we leave? Now. Tonight. My men will pack what you need. The rest will be taken care of. He nodded to his men, who moved past me into my bedroom with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. You'll stay in one of my properties until we can arrange something more permanent. You'll have your own space, your privacy, but you'll be watched, protected. It's for your safety. Protected, watched, prisoner. The words meant the same thing, dressed in different intentions. I stood in the center of my small living room, listening to strangers pack my clothes, my books, the few photographs I had of my grandmother. My old life being dismantled in real time, while Salvatore Santoro waited with the patience of a man who always got what he wanted. One more thing, he said, as his men emerged with my single suitcase and a box of possessions. The note you wrote. Your ex-fiancée sold you out. How did you know to use those specific words? I met his eyes, drawing on reserves of courage I didn't know I possessed. Because betrayal is the worst crime. worse than whatever laws you've broken. And I thought you'd want to know who your real enemy was." For the first time, his smile reached his eyes. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost approachable. Almost. "You were right. And that's why you'll be invaluable to me, Rosalia Catalano. You understand loyalty." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His grip was warm, firm, the gold ring on his finger pressing against my palm. A handshake that sealed a bargain I didn't fully understand but couldn't refuse. As I followed him down the 3 flights of stairs and into the waiting black Mercedes, leaving behind the only home I'd known, I touched my grandmother's cross for luck. The women in our family had instincts that saved lives, she'd always said. I'd saved his. Now I could only hope that decision wouldn't destroy mine. The villa sat in the hills above Palermo, surrounded by olive groves and silence. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. Whitewashed walls covered in bougainvillea, terracotta tiles warm under bare feet, views of the sea that stretched to Africa. My room was larger than my entire apartment had been, with a bed dressed in linen that smelled of lavender and a bathroom with marble counters and water pressure that didn't sputter. A gilded cage, spacious and lovely, and locked. Not that there were actual locks. I could walk the grounds during the day, swim in the pool, sit in the garden where lemon trees grew heavy with fruit. But the gates were guarded, the perimeter monitored, and the understanding was clear. I was here for my protection, and my protection meant I wasn't free to leave. The first week passed in a haze of adjustment. Salvatore was gone most days, conducting business I wasn't privy to, returning in the evenings to review documents and make calls in rapid Italian mixed with Sicilian dialect. I was given a desk in his study, a room lined with books and artwork that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned combined. My job was exactly what he'd described: coordinating schedules, managing communications, organizing shipments of what he called antiquities, but never let me examine too closely. His business, I learned through careful observation, revolved around art and historical artifacts. Sicilian ceramics, Greek amphorae, Roman statues excavated from private sites and sold to collectors across Europe. Some of it was legal, licensed through proper channels. Some of it existed in the gray spaces where legality bent around money and influence. And some, I suspected, crossed lines that would put him back in the Fed's crosshairs if they ever found proof. I didn't ask questions. That was the first rule of survival in Salvatore's world. See what you needed to see, ignore what you didn't, and never, ever volunteer to know more than required. But on the 8th day, curiosity got the better of me. I was alone in the study, organizing files of shipping manifests, when I found a folder tucked between ledgers. Inside were photographs, Salvatore, younger, maybe late 20s, standing beside a beautiful woman in a white dress. She had dark hair and sharp cheekbones, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind them, an older couple who shared Salvatore's features. His parents, I realized. That was taken 14 years ago. His voice startled me. I hadn't heard him enter. He stood in the doorway, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual I'd seen him, and it made him look younger, more human. I closed the folder quickly, shame heating my face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine. He crossed the room, taking the folder from my hands and studying the photograph himself. My engagement party. My parents insisted on celebrating before the wedding could be planned. They liked Ginevra, thought she came from a good family. His voice carried no emotion, just statement of fact. They died 6 months later. Car accident on the autostrada, a truck that lost control and crossed the median. I'm so sorry. The words felt inadequate, but I didn't know what else to say. He set the folder down, his fingers lingering on the photograph. The federal investigation later suggested the truck didn't lose control, that it was aimed, but they could never prove it, and my family decided not to pursue it. He looked at me then, his dark eyes holding a pain he quickly shuttered. That's when I learned that in our world, even family isn't sacred. That power makes you a target, and love makes you vulnerable. Is that why you never married Ginevra? The question escaped before I could stop it. A bitter smile touched his lips. I never trusted her enough to marry her. My parents' deaths taught me to question everyone's motives, to see the angles people play. Ginevra wanted the alliance, wanted the connections my name provided. But she didn't want me. Not really. And when she saw an opportunity to take what I'd built, without the inconvenience of sharing it. He trailed off, shrugging. You know how that ended. With me passing you a note. I said it softly, the weight of that night still heavy between us. With you saving my life. He corrected, his gaze intense. Do you know what that means in my world, Rosalia? A life debt. It's not something easily repaid or forgotten. You've already repaid it. The money, the protection. Money is nothing. Protection is self-interest. If the feds charge you, they might flip you against me. But what you did that night, warning a stranger at risk to yourself, that kind of loyalty is rare, priceless. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the tired lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. I need people I can trust, Rosalia. My world is built on alliances that shift like sand, partnerships that dissolve when convenient. You've already proven yourself more loyal than people I've known for decades. The intensity of his focus made my skin prickle with awareness. I just did what felt right. Exactly. He reached out, his fingers brushing the gold cross at my throat, the one piece of my grandmother I'd brought with me. Your grandmother taught you well. Honor, loyalty, instinct. Those are the qualities that keep you alive when everything else fails. His touch lingered, warm against my collarbone, and I felt something shift in the air between us. Not attraction exactly, or not just attraction, but recognition. Two people who'd survived by understanding the rules of dangerous games, who'd learned to read people and situations with the precision required to stay ahead of threats. I stepped back, needing distance from the heat of his proximity. What happens now? How long do I stay here? As long as necessary. The federal investigation is ongoing. Agent Ricci is persistent, and Ginevra's information gave them threads to pull. They're watching my businesses, my properties, anyone connected to me. You're safest here until that pressure eases. And my old life, my apartment, my job, both are gone. I had your landlord informed you wouldn't be returning. Vittorio believes you left Palermo to care for a sick relative in Catania. Your cousin has been told the same story, along with enough money to stop asking questions. He said it matter-of-factly, the erasure of my existence handled with the efficiency of his other business dealings. Anger flared, hot and sudden. You had no right to make those decisions for me. I had every right. His voice hardened. The moment you wrote that note, you became part of my world. And in my world, we protect our own by any means necessary, even if it means making choices they don't like. I'm not yours to protect, I shot back, the words sharper than I intended. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hand catching my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. Not rough, but firm enough to make his point. Yes, Rosalia, you are. You became mine the moment you chose to save me instead of protecting yourself. That's the bargain you made, whether you understood it or not. We stood frozen, his fingers warm against my skin, my heart hammering against my ribs. I should have been afraid, should have pulled away, put professional distance between myself and this man who'd rearranged my entire life. But I wasn't afraid. I was furious. And beneath the fury, something else stirred. a dark curiosity about what it meant to belong to someone like Salvatore Santoro. "I won't be your prisoner." I said it quietly, but with steel underneath. His thumb brushed along my jawline, a gesture too intimate for employer and employee, too calculated to be accidental. "You're not my prisoner. You're my responsibility. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." He smiled then, a real smile that made him devastatingly handsome. "Then perhaps we need to adjust your perspective." He released me, stepping back, the professional mask sliding into place. "Tomorrow, you'll accompany me to a meeting in Trapani. I need someone I trust to take notes, to observe the people we're dealing with. Consider it your first real assignment." "What kind of meeting?" I asked, trying to steady my breathing. "The kind where reading the room might save lives, including ours." He moved to his desk, pulling out a file and handing it to me. "Study these profiles tonight. Know who we're meeting with, their interests, their weaknesses. And Rosalia?" He waited until I met his eyes. "In my world, information is currency. What you learn tomorrow stays between us. Understood?" I took the file, its weight substantial in my hands. Understood. As I left the study, my legs unsteady beneath me, I realized the ground had shifted again. I wasn't just hiding in Salvatore's villa, waiting for the threat to pass. I was being drawn deeper into his world, given responsibilities that went beyond organizing schedules and managing communications. He was testing me, seeing if the loyalty I'd shown that night at Bella Vista could extend further, deeper, into the shadows where his real business lived. That night, I lay in my too-large bed, studying the profiles he'd given me. Men with dangerous reputations, businesses that fronted for darker dealings, connections that spanned continents. And tomorrow, I'd sit across from them, taking notes while Salvatore negotiated deals I only partially understood. My grandmother's cross rested against my heart, a reminder of where I came from. But as I memorized names and faces, preparing for my first real test in Salvatore's world, I wondered if I was still the same person who'd served wine at Bella Vista, or if that woman had disappeared the moment I'd written a note that changed everything. The women in our family had instincts that saved lives. I'd saved his. Now I had to trust that same instinct would save mine. Trapani shimmered under September sun, the western coast of Sicily stretching toward Tunisia in a haze of heat and salt air. We'd driven in convoy, 2 black Mercedes, Salvatore in the lead car with me beside him, his men following close behind. The meeting was scheduled at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, the kind of place where fishermen sold their catch and tourists ate grilled swordfish without understanding the conversations happening in the private rooms upstairs. I wore a navy dress Salvatore had provided, simple but elegant, with a notebook and pen that felt inadequate for whatever I was about to witness. He'd briefed me during the drive, his voice low and measured as he explained the players. Luca Moretti controls shipping routes from North Africa. We need his cooperation to move certain items through his ports without excessive inspection. Salvatore's hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He's reasonable, but greedy. He'll try to increase his percentage. Don't let your face show surprise at any number he mentions. And if he threatens you? I asked, remembering Agent Ricci's words about dangerous men. He won't, not directly. But he'll imply consequences for refusal. Watch how I react. Try to find leverage. He glanced at me, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. That's where you come in. You're observing him, reading his body language, his tells. When we leave, you'll tell me what you noticed. The restaurant was exactly as he'd described. Weathered tables on a terrace, fishing nets decorating the walls, the smell of garlic and fresh fish heavy in the air. We were escorted upstairs to a private room where Luca Moretti waited with 2 of his own men. He was older than Salvatore, maybe 50, with the thick build of someone who'd worked physically in his youth and ate well now. His handshake was too firm, his smile too wide, his eyes calculating as they swept over me. Santoro, it's been too long. His Italian carried the thick accent of Trapani, vowels stretched and consonants softened. And who is this? I wasn't aware you'd married. My assistant, Rosalia. Salvatore's hand rested briefly at the small of my back, proprietary. She's new to the business, learning how we operate. Moretti's gaze lingered on me, assessing, and I forced myself to meet his eyes without flinching. Beautiful and intelligent, I hope. The combination is rare. Rare enough that I trust her with sensitive matters. Salvatore's voice carried an edge, a warning. Shall we begin? They settled at the table, and I took my seat slightly behind Salvatore, notebook open, pen ready. The conversation began cordially. Pleasantries about the fishing season, the tourist economy, the way Trapani had changed over the years. Then it shifted, becoming coded, layered with meanings I had to work to follow. The shipments from Tunisia have been delayed, Moretti said, pouring wine for everyone. Port inspections have increased. Customs officials are being less cooperative than usual. Interesting. Salvatore sipped his wine, his posture relaxed. I was under the impression your relationship with customs was well established. It is. But someone has been making noise, asking questions, paying officials to look more carefully at certain manifests. Moretti's eyes narrowed. Someone who wants to disrupt our arrangement. Do you know who? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop myself. Both men looked at me, and I felt my face heat, but I didn't look away. Moretti laughed, a sound without humor. She speaks, and asks intelligent questions. He turned back to Salvatore. I like her, direct, no games. That's why she's here, Salvatore said smoothly, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the warning in his voice. Rosalia, what do you think? Who would benefit from disrupting our shipping arrangements? I thought of the profiles I'd studied, the web of alliances and rivalries Salvatore had explained. Someone who wants to force renegotiation, to prove they have power over the routes and can extract better terms by creating problems. Silence. Then Moretti's laugh again, this time genuine. Intelligent indeed. Yes, exactly right. And that someone is our mutual friend from Palermo, Cosimo Lombardi. My breath caught. Ginevra's father. The man whose daughter had tried to destroy Salvatore. Salvatore's expression didn't change, but I felt the shift in the room, the sudden weight of violence held barely in check. Lombardi is becoming a persistent problem. He's angry about his daughter, Moretti said, stating the obvious. Angry that you survived, angry that she's now exiled from the families. He blames you for her disgrace. I blame her for her betrayal. Salvatore's voice was cold, final. And I warned him that her actions would have consequences. Warning and delivering are different things. Moretti leaned back, his hands spread in a gesture of reasonableness. He's making trouble for both of us now. Disrupting your antiquities business, my shipping routes. We need to send a message that such interference won't be tolerated. This was it, I realized. The moment where business became violence, where negotiations turned into plans for retaliation. I kept my pen moving, recording everything in shorthand I'd developed, my face carefully neutral despite the dread pooling in my stomach. What kind of message? Salvatore asked. His construction contracts in Agrigento. An accident, perhaps. A delay that cost him money and reputation. Nothing permanent, nothing that brings the authorities, but enough that he understands the cost of continued aggression. I watched Salvatore consider this, watched the calculations running behind his dark eyes. I thought of Ginevra, of betrayal, of the note I'd written that had set all of this in motion. Was this what loyalty looked like in his world? Measured retaliation, strategic violence, messages sent through sabotage and intimidation. Agreed, Salvatore said finally, but nothing that traces back to either of us. Use intermediaries, people Lombardi doesn't know are connected. Of course. Moretti smiled, satisfied. And in return, I'll ensure your shipments from Tunisia flow smoothly again, though I'll need to increase my percentage to cover the additional costs of managing official oversight. There it was, the real reason for the meeting. Creating a problem, offering a solution, extracting payment for fixing what may never have been broken. I watched Salvatore negotiate, his voice calm and firm as he bargained Moretti down from 15% to 8%, the two men sparring with numbers and implications, until they reached an agreement that left both appearing satisfied. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises, Moretti kissing my hand with exaggerated gallantry before we left. In the car, silence stretched between us as Salvatore navigated the coastal road back toward Palermo, his expression thoughtful. So? He asked finally. What did you observe? I chose my words carefully. Moretti was lying about part of it, the disruptions in his shipping routes. He was too prepared with his solution, too specific about percentages. I think he created the problem himself, or exaggerated its scope to justify raising his fees. Salvatore's hands tightened slightly on the wheel, then relaxed. Go on. But the threat from Lombardi is real. When Moretti mentioned him, his body language changed. He was genuinely angry, maybe even worried, so he used a real problem to mask his opportunism. And the solution we agreed to? The accident in Agrigento? I hesitated, then answered honestly. It protects your business interests, but it also continues a cycle of retaliation that won't end until someone escalates beyond property damage. Salvatore pulled the car to the side of the road, the sea crashing against rocks below us, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. You disapprove. It's not my place to approve or disapprove, I said carefully. I'm here to observe and advise, not to judge. But you do judge. I can see it in your eyes. He reached out, his fingers catching my chin again in that gesture that had become familiar. You think I'm a bad man, Rosalia. That I do bad things. I think you're a complicated man who operates in a world with different rules than the one I knew. I met his gaze, refusing to look away. And I think you're trying to survive in that world the only way you know how. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability I hadn't expected. My parents were good people. They ran a legitimate business, paid their taxes, donated to churches and charities, and they were murdered for it, because someone saw weakness in their goodness. His thumb brushed along my jaw, the touch gentle despite the hardness in his voice. I learned that survival requires strength, requires being willing to do things good people won't do. That doesn't make me happy, but it keeps me alive. And what about the people who work for you, who trust you? I thought of myself, of the choice I'd made that night at Bella Vista. What happens to us when survival requires sacrificing those who've been loyal? He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the crash of waves and the distant cry of gulls. That's why I need you, Rosalia. To remind me where the lines are, to tell me when I'm crossing from necessary to cruel. His hand fell away, and he turned back to the wheel, pulling onto the road again. Your grandmother taught you honor and loyalty. My world has tried to beat those qualities out of me. Maybe together we can find balance. The rest of the drive passed in contemplative silence. I watched the landscape change from rocky coastline to olive groves, from the wild beauty of western Sicily to the crowded edges of Palermo. And I thought about what Salvatore had said, about balance, about honor in a dishonorable world. That night, back in the villa, I found a package on my bed. Inside was a gold bracelet, delicate and simple, with a small charm in the shape of a lemon, symbol of Sicily, of home. No note, but I knew it was from Salvatore. A thank you for today, for passing his test, for beginning to understand the impossible choices his world demanded. I fastened it around my wrist, the gold warm against my skin, and thought about the meeting in Trapani, about Luca Moretti's opportunism, about Lombardi's coming troubles, about the note I'd written weeks ago that had started all of this. The women in our family had instincts that saved lives, but no one had told me what happened after you saved a life, when that person drew you deeper into their world, when survival meant accepting moral compromises you'd never imagined making. I touched my grandmother's cross with one hand, the new bracelet with the other, caught between the innocence of my past and the complicated reality of my present. And I wondered if there was truly balance to be found, or if Salvatore and I were both just falling, hoping we'd catch each other before we hit the ground. 2 years passed like water through fingers, sometimes slow, pooling in moments of unexpected peace, sometimes rushing forward with violence that left me breathless. I was 26 now, no longer the uncertain waitress who'd scribbled a warning on a napkin. Salvatore was 36, his hair showing more silver at the temples, lines deepening around his eyes from the weight of an empire built on antiquities and influence. I'd become indispensable to him, not just as an assistant, though I still managed his schedules and communications, but as something more, advisor, confidant, the person he trusted to see the angles he might miss. I attended meetings from Trapani to Catania, learned to read the subtle tells of dangerous men, to negotiate in the language of implication and threat. I'd witnessed things I never spoke of, turned away from violence I couldn't prevent, made myself complicit in choices that haunted my sleep. But I was alive, protected. And somewhere along the way, the cage had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like the only safe place in a dangerous world. The villa had become home. I had my own suite now in a separate wing, with a sitting room where I kept books and photographs, a balcony overlooking olive groves that stretched to the sea. Salvatore had given me freedom within boundaries. I could visit my cousin in Catania with guards, shop in Palermo with surveillance, walk the grounds at any hour without asking permission. The federal investigation had stalled and eventually closed without charges, Agent Ricci reassigned to another case. Ginevra had disappeared completely, some said to South America, others to the bottom of the Mediterranean. I didn't ask. Cosimo Lombardi was dead, killed in an accident at one of his construction sites in Agrigento. The official investigation ruled it structural failure, poor safety protocols, criminal negligence. But I'd been in the room when Salvatore and Moretti planned that accident, when they'd decided the message needed to be permanent. I'd written the notes, filed them away, and tried not to think about the widow and 3 children who mourned a father whose death I'd helped document. This was the cost of survival in Salvatore's world, and I'd paid it. But something else had happened over those 2 years, something we'd both been fighting and denying and circling around like wary animals. The professional distance between us had eroded, worn away by proximity and shared danger, and moments of vulnerability neither of us had expected. Late nights in his study, reviewing contracts and strategies, our hands brushing as we passed documents. Morning coffee on the terrace, talking about everything except business. His love of Renaissance art, my grandmother's stories of wartime Sicily, the way sunlight looked different depending on the season. Quiet car rides returning from meetings, his hand finding mine when the road was dark and empty, the touch lasting longer each time. He never pushed, never used his power to demand what I wasn't ready to give. But the wanting was there, visible in the way his eyes followed me across rooms, in the careful distance he maintained as if afraid he'd lose control if he got too close. And I wanted to, God help me, wanted this dangerous man who'd rearranged my life, who protected me with the same fierce possessiveness he showed his empire, who looked at me like I was something precious instead of just useful. everything changed during a trip to Taormina. We'd gone to meet with a collector interested in a significant acquisition, a Roman bronze recovered from a private excavation near Syracuse. Salvatore wanted my assessment of the buyer's legitimacy, my instinct about whether the transaction was genuine or a setup. The meeting went well. The collector was an elderly professor with more money than sense, eager to add the bronze to his private collection, asking no questions about provenance. Salvatore negotiated a price that made even me blink at the number of zeros, and we concluded the deal over aperitivos overlooking the Greek theater with Mount Etna smoking in the distance. "We should stay tonight," Salvatore said as we left the professor's villa, the sky turning gold with sunset. "Celebrate. We've earned it." I should have said no. Should have insisted we return to the villa in Palermo, where propriety and separate wings kept boundaries intact. But something in his expression, a rare lightness that softened the hard edges I'd grown accustomed to, made me agree. He booked rooms at a hotel carved into the cliffside, the kind of place where honeymoon couples came to pretend they were the only people in the world. My room opened onto a terrace with views of the bay, the water turning from gold to rose to deep purple as evening descended. I showered, changed into the simple dress I'd brought, and wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Salvatore knocked at 8, dressed casually in dark slacks and a white shirt open at the collar, looking younger and more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "Dinner? There's a place I know, quiet, with the best seafood in Sicily." We walked through Taormina's narrow streets, past tourists and locals, past shops selling lemon soaps and ceramic tiles. He didn't touch me, but he stayed close, his presence a warmth at my side. The restaurant was small, family-owned, tables scattered on a terrace under strings of lights. We ate grilled prawns and pasta with sea urchin, drank white wine that tasted of sunshine and stone, and talked about nothing important. Childhood memories, favorite books, the way the stars looked different away from city lights. "Do you miss it?" he asked as the meal ended, his hand finally finding mine across the table, fingers intertwining. "Your old life, the simplicity of it." I thought about my cramped apartment, about serving wine to people who didn't see me, about the loneliness that had been my constant companion. "Sometimes, but not the way you think." I squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his gold ring. I miss not knowing the cost of things, not knowing how much violence it takes to maintain peace, how many compromises are required to survive. "I'm sorry." He said it simply, sincerely. "I took your innocence. Not intentionally, but I took it all the same." "You took my ignorance," I corrected. "Innocence I lost when my parents died and I learned the world doesn't care about fairness. You just showed me a different version of that truth." He raised my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles with a tenderness that made my breath catch. "Rosalia Catalano, the waitress who saved a mafia boss with a note. Do you know how often I think about that night? About the courage it took to warn a stranger, to risk everything for someone you had no reason to protect." "Every day," I admitted, the wine loosening my tongue. "I think about it every day. The moment I decided to write that note. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made a different choice." "You'd be safe," he said quietly, "living a normal life, free of me and everything I represent." "I'd be alone," I countered, working a job I hated, struggling to pay rent, with no one who truly knew me. "You've given me purpose, Salvatore. Protection, yes, but also meaning. I matter in your world in ways I never mattered before." Something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. He stood, drawing me up with him, his hands framing my face. "You matter to me. Not because you're useful, not because you're loyal, though you're both. You matter because you see me, Rosalia. The man beneath the reputation, the choices I've made, the things I regret. You see all of it, and you're still here." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. His lips found mine with a gentleness that contrasted with his strength, his hands cradling my face like I was something fragile and precious. I kissed him back, 2 years of denied wanting pouring into that moment, my fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. We left the restaurant in a haze of desire and wine, walking quickly through streets that blurred around us. His hotel room? Mine? It didn't matter. We chose his, closer, the door barely closing before we were kissing again. Desperate now, hands learning the shapes we'd only imagined. He undressed me slowly, reverently, his eyes dark with want as each piece of clothing fell away. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my neck, his hands skating over skin he'd never touched before. "Tell me, this isn't what you want, and I'll stop." "Don't stop." I pulled him toward the bed, toward the precipice we'd been circling for 2 years. "I want this. I want you." What happened next was both tender and fierce. Salvatore showing me the man beneath the careful control, the passion he kept locked away from the world. He touched me like I was salvation, like I was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking. And I gave myself to him completely, without reservation, crossing the final boundary that had kept us apart. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled of sea air and desire, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder, my head resting on his chest, where I could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. "This changes everything," he said quietly, stating the obvious. I know. I kissed the scar on his jaw, the one I'd been curious about for 2 years. "What happens now?" His arms tightened around me, possessive and protective. "Now you're truly mine. Not my assistant, not my responsibility. Mine. And anyone who tries to hurt you answers to me." I should have been frightened by the intensity of his claim, by the weight of belonging to someone like Salvatore Santoro. But I wasn't. I was home finally, in a way I'd never been in that cramped apartment or even my grandmother's house. Home in the arms of a dangerous man who'd shown me the truth about the world, and somehow, impossibly, learned to love me anyway. "Yours." I agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. "But you're mine too, Salvatore. That's the bargain. Complete possession or none at all." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Deal." Though I think I got the better end of it. We made love again as dawn broke over the Mediterranean, slower this time, learning each other with the patience of people who knew they had time. And when we finally fell asleep, wrapped around each other, I dreamed not of the violence I'd witnessed, or the choices I regretted, but of olive groves and lemon trees, of a future that somehow, against all odds, looked like happiness. The women in our family had instincts that saved lives. I'd saved his with a note. He'd saved mine by showing me I was stronger than I'd known, that love could exist even in the darkest places, that home wasn't a location but a person who saw all of you and chose you anyway. I'd started as his prisoner. I'd become his partner. And now, finally, I was his. Completely, irrevocably, by choice. 3 months after Taormina, our fragile peace shattered. I was 27 when they took me, Salvatore 37, and the world we'd built came apart with brutal efficiency. It happened in Mondello, the beach town just outside Palermo, where I'd gone with Elena, the villa's housekeeper who'd become something like a friend. She'd insisted I needed an afternoon away from business, from the weight of Salvatore's world. Just gelato and shopping and the simple pleasure of walking barefoot on sand. I should have brought more security. Salvatore's standing order was 2 guards minimum whenever I left the villa. But Elena and I had only taken Marco, one of the younger men, and the beach was crowded with families and tourists. Safe. Normal. A moment to remember what ordinary life felt like. They struck while I was alone, Marco distracted by Elena at a beachside cafe, me browsing postcards at a small shop. 3 men, professional and fast, a cloth over my mouth that smelled of chemicals, my vision tunneling to black before I could scream. The last thing I saw was the postcards falling from my hands, colorful images of Sicilian coastline scattering across the ground. I woke in darkness, my head pounding, my hands zip-tied behind my back. The space smelled of mold and diesel, the floor beneath me cold concrete. As my eyes adjusted, I made out the shapes of a basement, small and windowless, lit only by a bare bulb hanging from exposed pipes. "She's awake." A voice, male, speaking Italian with an accent I couldn't place. "Inform Volkov." Volkov, Russian, the Bratva, the same organization Cosimo Lombardi had been working with before his accident. The ones who'd wanted Salvatore destroyed, who'd lost money and influence when their plans failed. I'd known they were still out there, circling like sharks, waiting for an opportunity. I hadn't realized I'd become that opportunity. The man who entered was massive, built like the bodybuilders I'd seen in gyms, his face a roadmap of scars and violence. Rosalia Catalano. He said my name like he was tasting something bitter. "Salvatore Santoro's whore. You're going to help us send a message." Terror flooded my mouth with copper, but I forced my voice steady. "He'll kill you for this. All of you." "Perhaps. But first he'll pay. 10 million euros for your safe return, and information about his operations, his contacts, his shipments." The Russian smiled, showing gold teeth. "You see, Kara, you're worth more than money. You're the key to destroying everything he's built. They kept me in that basement for 3 days, fed me enough to keep me alive, let me use a bucket in the corner when necessary, treated me with the casual cruelty of people who saw me as an object rather than a person. They didn't torture me, not physically, but the psychological warfare was constant. Descriptions of what they'd do to me if Salvatore didn't cooperate, plans for how they'd use me to bait him into a trap, speculation about whether he'd actually pay or cut his losses and let me die. I thought of Taormina, of Salvatore's hands on my skin, his voice murmuring promises in the dark, of the life we'd built over 2 years, the partnership that had become love. And I thought of the note I'd written, the instinct that had bound us together, the choice that had led to this moment in a dark basement, surrounded by men who wanted to destroy us both. On the 4th day, everything changed. I woke to shouting, gunfire, the sound of violence approaching. The door burst open, and there he was. Salvatore, dressed in black, a gun in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, his men swept through the building with military precision, eliminating threats with the efficiency of people trained for exactly this kind of operation. He crossed to me in 3 strides, cutting the zip ties with a knife, his hands gentle as they checked me for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine." My voice cracked, 2 years of carefully maintained composure shattering now that safety was close. They wanted money, information. I know what they wanted. He pulled me against his chest, his heartbeat rapid beneath my ear. And they're all dead now, every single one. He carried me out of that basement, through corridors painted with violence, past bodies I didn't let myself look at too closely. Outside, dawn was breaking over Palermo, the sky turning gold and rose, and I realized they'd held me somewhere in the industrial district, one of dozens of abandoned warehouses that dotted the waterfront. The drive back to the villa was silent, except for my shaking breaths and Salvatore's murmured assurances. He held me the entire way, his arms tight around me, his jaw set with barely controlled rage. When we arrived, he carried me inside despite my protests that I could walk, took me directly to his room, and sat me on the edge of his bed while he examined every inch of me for injuries. "I should have protected you better." His voice was raw, broken in a way I'd never heard. "Should have seen this coming, should have..." You saved me. I caught his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. Salvatore, you came for me. You found me. Of course I came for you. He said it like it was obvious, like there had never been any doubt. You're mine, Rosalia. Mine to protect, mine to defend. I would have burned all of Palermo to find you. I believed him. I'd seen the bodies, the efficiency of the rescue, the cold calculation with which he'd eliminated every threat. What happens now? His expression hardened. War. The Bratva declared war when they took you. Now I finish it. What followed was 3 weeks of violence that shook Sicily's criminal underworld. Salvatore moved against the Russian organization with methodical precision, dismantling their operations piece by piece. Shipments seized, warehouses raided, contacts arrested or eliminated. He worked with calculated fury, and I saw a side of him I'd only glimpsed before, the ruthless strategist who'd built an empire on the ruins of his enemies. I insisted on being part of it, on attending the meetings where plans were made, on reviewing the intelligence, on using my instincts to identify weak points in the Bratva's network. It was my kidnapping that had started this war. I refused to be simply the victim who cowered while men fought over me. You should rest. Salvatore told me one night, 2 weeks into the campaign, his study scattered with maps and photographs and reports. Recover from what happened. I'll recover by helping you end this. I stood beside him, my hand finding his on the desk. I'm not fragile, Salvatore. I'm angry. And I want them to know that taking me was the worst mistake they ever made. He looked at me with something like pride, like love, like recognition that I was exactly who he needed me to be. My fierce Rosalia, what did I do to deserve you? You saw me, I said simply. When I was invisible to everyone else, you saw me, and you gave me purpose. The war ended when Salvatore eliminated Dmitry Volkov personally, the man who'd ordered my kidnapping. I wasn't there. He'd refused to let me anywhere near that final confrontation, but I saw him after. Saw the blood on his clothes, the grim satisfaction in his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly as he washed them clean. It's done, he said, pulling me into his arms. They're finished. You're safe. But safe wasn't enough anymore. The kidnapping had proven that Palermo would never truly be secure, that enemies would always circle, waiting for opportunities. We need to leave, I said quietly. Start over somewhere they can't find us. He didn't argue. Within a week, we'd arranged everything. The villa sold to a front company, his businesses in Sicily transferred to trusted lieutenants, our existence erased from official records. We fled to Sardinia, to a remote property on the Costa Smeralda, where crystalline water met white sand, and the nearest neighbor was kilometers away. We spent 3 years there, from my 27 to 30, his 37 to 40. Years of healing, of learning to be something other than boss and assistant, criminal and accomplice. We were simply Salvatore and Rosalia, 2 people who'd survived hell together and chosen to build something new from the ashes. He taught me about art and history, the legitimate passion that had drawn him to the antiquities business before it became a cover for darker dealings. I taught him about normal life, about grocery shopping and cooking meals, and the simple pleasure of days without violence. We walked on beaches, swam in water so clear you could see schools of fish darting below, made love in a bed that faced the sea and woke to sunlight streaming through windows we didn't need to cover for security. It wasn't perfect. He still had nightmares about finding me too late, about that basement. I still flinched at sudden movements, still felt my pulse spike when strangers approached too quickly. But we healed each other, slowly, with patience and love, and the understanding that came from shared trauma. On our 3rd anniversary of leaving Palermo, Salvatore proposed. Not with fanfare or elaborate planning, but simply, during a walk at sunset, the sky painted in shades of gold and crimson. Marry me. He said it like a question and a statement, like he already knew the answer. Not because you're mine, though you are. Not because I've claimed you, though I have. But because I choose you, Rosalia. Every day, every moment. Choose me too. I said yes. Of course I said yes. We married in a small church in the hills above our villa. Just the two of us and the priest, who didn't ask questions. I wore a simple white dress, held a bouquet of wild rosemary and bougainvillea. He wore a dark suit and the gold ring he'd always worn, adding a matching band that symbolized promises we'd already been keeping for years. When he kissed me, sealing vows spoken in the language of his ancestors, I felt my grandmother's presence, her approval, her understanding that sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places. After 3 years of exile, we returned to Palermo, not to the criminal empire Salvatore had left behind, but to something new. Using the money he'd accumulated over decades, legitimately invested and carefully laundered, we bought a historic hotel in the city center, restored it with art and antiques he'd collected, legal now, purchased through proper channels, opened it as a luxury destination for travelers who appreciated beauty and history and didn't ask too many questions about the owner's past. The hotel succeeded beyond our expectations. Salvatore's eye for quality and my organizational skills proved as effective in legitimate business as they had in criminal enterprises. We hired staff, built relationships with local suppliers, became part of Palermo's respectable business community. We were invited to charity galas, served on boards, donated to churches and schools. And at night, we returned to a penthouse above the hotel, to a space we'd designed together, to a life that was ours by choice, rather than necessity. We were Salvatore and Rosalia Santoro, husband and wife, business partners, survivors of a journey that had started with a note scribbled on a napkin and ended with a love neither of us had expected to find. Sometimes, late at night when we sat on our terrace overlooking Palermo's lights, Salvatore would trace the gold bracelet on my wrist, the one with the lemon charm he'd given me after my first test in Trapani. "Do you ever regret it?" he'd ask. The note, the choice that started everything. And I'd think about that night at Bella Vista, about being invisible, alone, exhausted, about the instinct that had made me write a warning to a dangerous stranger, about everything that followed, the kidnapping, the violence, the impossible choices, but also the love, the partnership, the life we'd built from ashes and blood. Never, I'd tell him, meaning it. Not for a single moment. The women in our family had instincts that saved lives. I'd saved his with a note. He'd saved mine by giving me purpose and protection and love. We'd saved each other. Really. Over and over. Until we weren't just surviving, but living. Until we weren't just bound by circumstances, but by choice. And that choice, made again every day, was the truest thing I'd ever known.